So how much is your locksmith business worth? It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Here in just a minute, I'm going to have two guests on, Michael from Anderson Lock and Safe, and of course, my dad, Pete, the lock father from Country Lock and Key. And we're going to dive into it. Both of them have purchased locksmithing businesses, and I'm excited to dive in and really get to the bottom to help you figure out how much your locksmith business is worth. Enjoy. All right, hey everybody, thank you for tuning in. And of course, I have Michael with Anderson Lock and Safe and my dad, Pete, here from Country Lock and Key. So thank you both for hopping on.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, appreciate it, PJ, as always. This is a lot of fun. Hello to everybody again. Gotten to do this a couple times, so I think it's going to be really an interesting conversation today. We're talking about, probably the thing that we're all thinking about but never talking about. What is my business worth, and what is another potential locksmith business worth if I want to do a buy and build or an add-on or somehow do an integration. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. And Michael, and as you have seen or maybe listened to some of the ones that my dad and I write, so I find online locksmith business listings, and we start kind of hashing it out a little bit. And kind of one of the themes is how inexpensive most of the time they are. At the same time, how there's no training and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be fun to kind of get into some of the nuances of the deals. But before we get started, if Michael, if you could kind of remind everybody of what your background is and how you came to own a locksmithing company.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Michael Hansen. If anyone ever wants to reach out, just Michael at AndersonLockandSafe.com. Yeah, so I was originally in management consulting. I just went from contract to contract and worked with software development teams and management teams and kind of helped them work together, release software more efficiently, and ended up wanting to basically put it all, bet the farm on some company. And so I found Anderson Lock and Safe in 2018 and ended up closing a deal in 2019 to become the new owner. And it's been 5 years. It's been a lot of fun. So many things have happened since then. And now it's funny because I can't imagine doing anything else. I can't, there's no way I'd get the satisfaction. There's no way I'd get the joy. There's stress for sure, but there's no way I could go back to just being a corporate person. Just, it wouldn't work.
Very nice. So so you've been doing it for 5 years now. And as we've talked about previously, like you're real heavy more on the business end of it and not so much on the locksmithing end, which is kind of opposite of what we see a lot in locksmithing and really any sort of technician business, right? Someone who's really good at doing the work, they end up starting or getting a business instead of kind of the opposite. So it's kind of fun always talking to you because you have a different point of view than someone like even my dad or even like myself who grew up in the lock and key industry, right? Like, I mean, you can't help but kind of veer one way or the other. So yeah, it's fun. So is what we're talking about today is how to value your locksmith business. So the big takeaway I would like everyone to have watching this today is when you get done listening to this, you have a good general idea of how to value your existing business. And so I'd like to kind of kick it off to you, Michael. When you're looking at maybe like an add-on or a locksmithing business, can you kind of walk us through a little bit of how you're looking to value something like that?
Yeah. So it's definitely going to be a long answer because I probably looked at 30 different companies where you've actually dug inside the books, had an NDA, not necessarily an LOI, a letter of intent, but you have an NDA and you get a chance to look at these companies. I think the first thing I always look at is as soon as I hear who it is, what immediately comes to mind? Is it positive? Is it something that we think we could potentially roll in? We've made 5 purchases in our 5 years. And obviously it's a pretty low percentage of the total that we've looked at. And so number one is, like, do they fit our model? And so if you're primarily a commercial locksmith, do you want to buy somebody or a locksmith that's doing 95% high-end residential? I don't know what the answer is. Like you have to kind of figure out what's your model that works for you. Do you want to suddenly carry on totally different inventory? If you don't sell safes, do you want to start selling safes? If you don't work on safes, do you want to start doing that? If this company is completely automotive, do you want to kind of change your model? And so for us, and everything I say today is just my own opinion. I'm obviously looking at something that's going to fit our model, right? So we're looking at commercial. We're looking at probably a certain size in terms of earnings and a certain size in terms of technicians. So maybe not necessarily the one-man shop, but something that has an existing customer base, has vans in the field with mobile technicians, and then having a storefront is something you want to consider as well. Like, is that something you're looking for? Are you looking for another physical location or not? And so, and again, there's pros and cons to everything. Having another shop is going to give you more traction on Google, more opportunities for guys to get parts, maybe closer to their homes. It's going to help to bring in more revenue if the shop is busy and profitable. But it can also be a whole nother overhead. Now you got rent, and now you got more insurance and another internet to pay for, and another air conditioner and roofing and insurance. The list goes on and on. So I think you really want to. Well, I always start out with looking at, does the business kind of fit what we're trying to do, and is it going to be an add-on that's going to help us, right? And then you try to look at, what do you know about that owner and their reason for selling? Are they a person with a lot of integrity? Are they a person that you're going to want to work a deal with? Or are they a person that, maybe is a little less trusting and maybe a little snaky, and maybe not the person that you want to, be diving into something this intimate with? And so that's what I kind of look for first. After that, I'm diving right into the books. And so we're looking at earnings first. Is the business profitable? How profitable is it? If it's under $500,000 in earnings, or EBITDA, or seller discretionary earnings, whatever you call it, ultimately, how much profit is the company able to produce?
Michael, if I could stop you real quick. And I just want to make sure, people who are have either bought businesses or are really into that kind of stuff understand what EBITDA is, or seller discretion earnings, or even cash flow. Sometimes it gets called, right? Depending on the situation. If we can just take a moment and just explain in the most basic terms what that is.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you as a locksmith company produce some amount of revenue. How much total stuff did you sell? How much labor and materials did you sell? Let's just say you sold $1 million. At the end of the year, what were you actually able to take home after all of your expenses and your payroll and overhead was all paid? What were you actually able to take home? And that's ultimately what any buyer is going to be looking at first. Because if that number is negative, basically you had to spend money in order to make $1 million in revenue, it's going to be hard to sell, because now that buyer is going to have to really make some changes. And so there's an old adage, revenue is for vanity and profit is for sanity. We in the locksmith industry, we always talk about how many trucks we have and how much revenue we have. And let me tell you, it's vanity metrics. It doesn't matter at all. It's like when you're actually looking at it inside the mind of a buyer, they don't care about that. They want to see that the thing is able to produce cash flow so that they can pay for it.
Kind of keep that going for a minute. So, it's essentially the profit of the company along with any owner wages that are paid. So for simple math, let's say if you did $1 million a year and your net profit was $100,000 and you paid yourself $50,000, you'd be looking at $150,000 is what a person looking at buying the company, when they're talking about cash flow or seller discretion earnings, that is kind of the core of the amount that they're talking about. There's some nuance in there with depreciation and some other stuff, but it's kind of a good general number. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think in general it's good, and that's what a lot of the private equity guys or the investors, they call it EBITDA, which is the earnings before you take expenses for interest, depreciation, taxes, and amortization. Things like an owner's salary is a potential add back, which means you can add that as potential income for a new buyer that's going to be coming into the company. There are exceptions, however, especially the smaller companies. Like let's just say it's a company with 5 employees. That seller's salary is going to, let's just say they're paying themselves $80,000 a year. If you remove it completely, you're not taking into the fact that they probably do a lot of the work. And they might do work in the field, they might do work of dispatching, they might do work of the management, and somebody else in your company is going to have to take that on. So depending on what their role is, I won't necessarily give that entire salary 100% as an add back. That's just me.
Yeah, I think that's a great nuanced point of that. So if you own the locksmithing business and you're very active in it and you're playing a role day to day, that is probably a seller is going to probably be wanting to cut that back, either 100% or 40% or somewhere along that. Yeah, thank you for adding that point in.
Yeah, and it depends. I mean, if somebody really is just sitting back and has no involvement with the business, then obviously, you could give that back. But usually, at least in our industry, the owner operator has some involvement. Yeah. They're the one doing the reviews. They're the one, making bigger decisions on what key machines we buy, what vehicles we invest in, who to fire, who to hire, all that type of stuff.
Okay. And then so once you kind of do all of your due diligence and you look at all of that, what are you looking as far as offers go, or to compare what their earnings are compared to what they're asking? Like what type of a multiple do you think is realistic? So
I talked to there's a couple of private equity conglomerates, these big investors that are coming into the locksmithing space, just so everybody's aware, like it's happening. It's happening. I had a conversation just out of curiosity, like, what are you guys valuing certain size businesses at? And they said they look at earnings multiple. They don't care about your inventory. They don't care about your branding. They're not looking. I mean, these guys are just looking to scoop up investing companies and eventually flip them, right?
Yep.
And so between 500 and $1 million in earnings is kind of where they were starting. They were looking at 3 times 500,000 is what a $500,000 earnings come a 4 multiple. And then between $1 and $2 million, you're looking at about a 5 to 6 multiple, and between $2 and $4 million earnings, you're at about a 6 to 8 multiple. Again, I understand for most of the companies, this is a long ways away, right? Because 99% of companies are way smaller than this. But I'm just telling you that's what they're kind of looking at. When you're getting into like the $4+ million EBITDA locksmith companies, there's probably like a couple in the nation. It's not that common. So anyways, knowing that is helpful. I think that's something that we can all kind of like aspire and grow to. But for me, if it's under that $500,000, it's probably going to be a 2 to 3 multiple. And it just depends on how badly we want to make a deal with this company. How badly do we feel about this integration working out? I think as a single locksmith, like as a single mobile locksmith, or maybe it's 1 or 2 employees, maybe you got a shop and you as the owner are the guy running the calls, you're probably about a 1x earnings, maybe. But remember that the amount of buyers you have is going to be really limited, because you either have like somebody with locksmith experience that wants to take over your company and essentially buy the job, again, which is hard. It's a lot of money to invest for something where you're not, you're going to be scraping by for a long time if it ever goes beyond that. And then for a strategic buyer, again, you're buying something that doesn't necessarily have a lot of traction without that seller on the team anymore. If it's Joe's locksmith and he's been working in Scottsdale for 30 years and he wants to sell his company, well, now everybody just knows Joe. And now that our company, Anderson Lock and Safe, has taken over Joe's company, you don't have that rapport anymore. Joe's not there. There's a lot that can be lost with that that individual that was there.
So if there's a company, maybe it's just one guy or gal who has a small locksmith business, and their earnings with their salary is like $80,000.
Yeah,
they're kind of looking at a 1x EBIT, or just that amount for what we might be looking at.
But again, your only buyer is going to be maybe a strategic buyer, and a strategic buyer is going to be somebody from your industry that's larger than you that is looking to pick you up. And again, that's a maybe. It's really hard. The most one-man businesses, sole proprietorships, or small two-person LLCs are not going to get bought. That's just the truth.
Sure.
There's too many of them. We have a very highly fragmented industry. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of locksmiths just in our town, and most of them are one person. And so like the idea of like going to one and specifically and buying it, if there's really big revenue numbers and repeat business and maybe contracts put in place, I could see it, selling. But unfortunately, there are so many people that really, at the smaller level, like under $100,000 in earnings, that really overvalue what the business is worth. And I hate to say that, but it's just the truth.
And and I would agree. And we see it a lot on the listings that we talk about, on the shows that we do. But I would actually like to take a moment though to bring up something a little separate than this, which is like, I think it's so important for business owners of one man operations or two, which is totally fine and also can be a great vehicle for you and your family, to earn a living over the course of your working career. And so at the same time though, I think it's important to just bring up the importance of making sure that you're having investments or retirement plans outside of your business. Because I've talked to so many people in the business who view selling their business at the end of their career or when they'd like to retire as their retirement, nest egg. And for these smaller businesses, which is fine, and have created, I know tons of them personally who have created wonderful lives for them and their family. But there was never any like in their head, we all get these thoughts sometimes, right? That we just come up with something and it sounds good to us. And so we just stick with it. And which is, I'm going to sell my business when I'm done, that it's done great for me. And so now I can do great for someone else. But the value of that is nowhere close to what they're wanting, which is what they're talking, which is what you're talking about. Which is why I just want to say that if you're out there and you're doing that, and that's awesome, and I'm guessing you're running a wonderful locksmithing business, please look at getting some sort of other retirement investment tool, like a Roth or, whatever it might be, some sort of investments out there. So when you're done working, you have some money outside of what the value of your business is worth. So I just want to throw that in there real quick. I just think it's important to bring up while we're talking about that. Yeah,
it is really important. There are so many guys that I know that run a one-man shop, and I feel for them, because I know that our technicians here are making well more than they are, and yet they don't have to answer the phone. It's not like if they take a vacation, no work gets done and customers are not taken care of, and they don't spend their free time doing accounts receivable, and they're not sitting there trying to answer emails and log into vendor portals to do work orders, and they're not. It's a really tough life, and I want to make sure that, like, if you are a one-man shop, what's your plan? Really make sure that you have a plan to build beyond. Get yourself out of the van. Get yourself to the point where you can get some help, and maybe set a sight and set a vision. If you're an older owner and maybe you have a smaller lock shop, like, don't be afraid to create a plan and share it with your employees. Say, like, listen, this is my 3-year plan. I want to sell this place for whatever, $1 million. If we can get to these earnings, this is how it's going to be worth $1 million. If we can get to $350,000 a year, it's going to be worth $1 million. And you know what? If you help me get here, I'm going to share it with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at least that gives everybody a path that we can all get to, where everybody respects an owner's decision that eventually they want to retire. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to die with the business. But I think there always has to be that path and the thought of, how do I get to that next step? And don't be afraid to bring others with you. and just be honest with them, because it's only going to help. The more transparent you are, the better off we're going to be. And the bigger the vision, the more exciting the future, the more people are going to rally around it. I mean, I can't tell you like that. In order to get really, really good people on our team, we have to have a vision worth going for. You know what I mean? We want to be the largest locksmith in North America. That's our vision. Like, we're not sleeping until that happens. Like, we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that we're hitting our goals each year to get closer and closer to that goal. And, you know, will we hit it? I mean, I believe we will. But if we fall short, we're going to get a lot farther than if we would have never shared anything and just said, you know, you should be grateful for your job.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true, very true. Dad, so I'd like to kind of turn to you. And so you've been hearing everything Michael has to say. And I mean, I know you've heard a lot of this before. You have some of your own thoughts. You've also bought locksmiths in surrounding areas,
Right.
and you've had some wins, you've had some losses, right? Where are you at with hearing all of this? Like, what?
Well, I agree. I want to be the largest locksmith in the Northwest. You know, it's just not an ego. It's just, I believe it can be done.
Yeah.
The retirement thing, yeah, eventually I've got to stop because of health or something else. I enjoy doing it, so I never plan on quitting. That's my problem. But you have to have people in place to make sure you're able to, if you do get ill or whatever, that the company will keep running.
And how about the multiples? Like, so of the shops, the existing shops that you've bought and taken over and done that, like, where are you at with the multiples on the earnings, and like where does it become attractive or unattractive?
Well,
I mean, outside of less is better. I mean, I know that. I mean,
no, it's hard to say. Every shop's a little different. What I want is I want it to produce enough to pay everybody, you know, pay all the bills and still make a profit for the end of the year. Yeah, I mean, I don't have the slightest idea what our company's worth. You know, in my head, it's worth $100,000, you know.
Well, I mean, I probably know a buyer for that amount, you know.
Yeah.
But, so, no, when it comes to, so something I want to bring up is like I know you have bought and sold locksmithing business when I was a kid. And I didn't really, I wasn't really too in tune what's going on. But the one that the last one you did, which was 6 years ago, 8 years ago, I know that was not only a strategic buy, but it was also a awesome opportunity.
Yes.
Right?
Definitely.
And it was just one of those, it was like,
it was the oldest lock shop in there.
Yeah, it was like a slam dunk.
Right.
And like the stars honestly aligned for it to happen for you. But looking back at those type of situations, I mean, and let's talk about earnings for a second, because that's what everyone's interested in. So this one had one van.
Yes.
One store that was leased. The owner of the lock shop happened to own the building.
Right.
And so they gave you so they wanted to continue to rent it to you.
For 5 years.
Yep, at a really good rate.
Absolutely.
The oldest locksmith in town, been in that same location for 50 years.
Right.
I mean, about as good as it can get. As far as the multiples go, what did you pay? You mind sharing?
For that shop?
Yeah, just for the multiples. Just for the multiples.
I think we paid $50,000.
So it was, you paid 1x.
Yes.
Like he paid 1x for the oldest locksmith in town, who had been around for 50 years, who he competed with for the past, 30 years prior to that.
And he wouldn't even talk to me.
Yeah, and who had a wonderful reputation in town, had a good reputation, great locksmith, and thankfully he owned the building, and so he still is getting a lease payment from you.
Yeah, he was supposed to sell it to me, and that never happened.
Yeah, but and my point of kind of bringing up the story is that it was a wonderful locksmithing operation, a one-man operation. great reputation. It did make money. It provided very well for this gentleman his entire life as a business.
Right.
It was a wonderful buy for you.
Absolutely.
But it was only a 1X.
And that's a really good lesson, I think, for anybody. That's if it's a 1 or 2 man woman operation, you're probably going to be looking at about a 1X. You can list it for sale for more, for sure, but the amount of people that are going to be willing to buy that, it's going to be pretty slim. So the fact that you got 1X is good. That means they were willing to make a deal, because unfortunately, you were probably the only option.
I was.
Yeah. At the end, he was the only option.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Then he talks to me.
Yeah, and they're friends now. Worked out even better, Yep. But okay, so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I want to kind of transition here for a little bit as we kind of wrap this up and talk about the risks. Okay, like as Michael, as you've mentioned several times now, as what my dad's well aware, when you go to either buy or sell something, there is an inherent risks in that. And the couple, Michael, that we've highlighted in several videos now is that if someone's wanting to buy it and you're not offering any training, right? Like that's a huge risk factor for someone buying. Yeah. A risk factor for the seller is if you're going to do some seller financing, which is a wonderful risk factor for the buyer and not so great for the seller. We personally know someone who sold in a different industry, sold a business, private seller financing, and it lasted, was it 4 months? I think 4 months. And they had to come back in and, it's a train wreck at that point, right?
Yeah.
But Michael, I'm curious from your point of view, looking at them, like what are some risk factors that are on either the buyer or seller side that are important?
So I'm going to start with a seller. Here's some things that I see really commonly, and I really want to get the message. If you're trying to sell your business, stop doing this. Stop taking cash from the company and calling it unreported. Nobody's going to pay for that. You are actually, here's the reality. If you're worth a 3X multiple, every $100 you take could be worth $300 or is worth $300. So the reality is there is no buyer willing to pay for the cash you're taking out, for the under the counter sales or cash you're taking out of the cash register or whatever. Just you have to stop that if you're trying to sell, because your only buyer is going to be somebody that, number one, trusts you, but number two, wants to basically do the same thing and just have this cash under the table type of a thing. It's going to affect your net income, which is ultimately going to affect your value. It'll affect your ability to get debt. It'll affect how your financials look in general. So I would just go against that for sure. As a seller too, don't put like seller will stay on 2 weeks as the, as part of the offering. Like, be willing to see this thing successful. Make sure that you're presenting it as something that, well, you want to sell the company, you're sad to see it go. And you're not just so eager to get out of there that you're like, all right, here's the keys, bye-bye. Nobody wants to catch the falling knife. And anytime I see that where a seller's like just out, you know how badly they want to get out. You're not going to get a good value because buyers will recognize that and they'll lowball you knowing that you just so badly want to get out of it. Outside of that, for a seller, I think that depending on who your buyer is, inventory can be a very overrated asset. Because if you're buying, if you're a strategic buyer and looking at buying a potential locksmith and they have an overwhelming amount of inventory, when you already have an overwhelming amount of inventory, that's the last thing you want to pay for. So you want to pay for earnings, you want to pay for the assets like the key machines that are going to create income for you. But things like inventory, you already know the problem with inventory. There's carrying costs and things get obsolete. And then people don't even know what inventory you have anymore. So they end up buying stuff that you already have. It's just an absolute nightmare and a mess. So as a seller, I want to get in the mindset, if I'm ready to sell in the next couple of years, start doing just in time. Start trying to rely more on your distributors and your vendors to carry some of your costs, because I don't know exactly how you run your books, if everything you buy goes as COGS or if it goes on your balance sheet as inventory, but regardless, it's going to affect your cash flow and it's going to affect your P&L in a negative way. And ultimately the buyer, as much as they may like the business, all these different things, your discretionary earnings, your earnings at the bottom of the profit and loss statement are what they're looking for. And so I would definitely take that in mind too.
Yeah, those are some great points, right? I mean, it's different if you're operating a business, let's say, to maximize how much you pay in taxes. I mean, that's probably the most politically correct way I could put it, compared to maximizing to sell, right? And I think an interesting point you brought up is the acknowledgement of being like, hey, I want to sell this business in the next 3 or so years. I need to strategically start pumping my balance sheet, my profit and loss to look good, which in turn is going to mean you're going to pay more taxes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's just how it is. But I know it's something for small businesses in particular, like, one of the tricks a lot of times is like, how can I do as much as I can to lower my tax liability, which makes a lot of sense in some regards, but not in the selling.
For sure. And I'm not saying you don't want to limit your tax liability. I don't think that's the issue at all. I think you can do both, but I think having a quality of earnings or having an accountant like just take a look at your books and figure out how to make it more presentable to a buyer is a worthwhile investment if you're trying to sell. If you can afford it, do it, because it'll pay for itself in spades. And from a buyer's perspective, I think part of diligence, which normally what happens when you're buying a company is you submit a letter of intent, and it's sort of like an offer letter. It's basically signed by both parties, the buyer and the seller, saying our intent is to sell the business, our intent is to buy the business. This is the intended price, but obviously we have to look at we have to do our due diligence to make sure that price makes sense, and there could be adjustments. But during that 30 to 60 day due diligence process, as a buyer, look at everything. Make sure you can prove out, look at the invoices, look at those transactions hitting the bank account, make sure that you get somebody that's really good at accounting that can kind of help cross-reference all these different things. Because if you're just taking a seller at their word, you're not going to find mistakes. And there's always mistakes. There's always something that you're not accounting for 100%. And you may see bigger opportunities than maybe you realized before. Maybe they expensed a vehicle, or instead of putting it on the balance sheet, maybe there are other things that they paid for that you're not going to add to the price, but you're realizing, okay, well, they use a consultant for this random thing. They had this huge advertising campaign that absolutely bombed that they spent $15,000 on. These are one-time expenses that I can assume as a buyer, I'm not going to do that same thing next year. So I can actually look at it as an add back. And so when you're digging, you want to look through, absolutely comb through every transaction you can, just to make sure that what they're telling you is right. And then the other thing as a buyer, as a strategic buyer, it's a little different than if you're just buying this business and you don't own a business, or you're just trying to kind of come in for the first time. You also have to think about, what is this business worth to me? Not necessarily what is it worth on its own legs, but if I apply my systems, my management systems, my operational systems, my inventory systems, my branding, my CRM, the way that we answer the phone, the way that we schedule, our performance pay, the way that our shops are structured, all those types of things to this business, is it now worth more because we have a system that is better than their current system?
Absolutely. Dad, when it comes to with what Michael said and your own experience when you were looking at buying the different businesses, the ones you did, the ones you haven't, the ones you've sold,
right?
What are the big things that come to your mind?
Well, as I always say, I look at, how much money they made, like you should, and what's their overhead and whatnot. I myself like old inventory, because you can't get it anymore. So I want to be the shop with it. So I might be over stocked with old inventory, but that's my preference. They have a Lamborghini, and they need a lock. The guy who's going to have it if it's out there. But
well, you got to come down to Phoenix and take all of our inventory, because we are definitely willing to give up lots of it. Especially the stuff
now you're
me.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised I don't fly down and haul a U-Haul home, you know?
Oh, please do it. It would be the biggest thing.
it's, it's all that stuff you have to take in consideration because, as you said, Michael, is that if Joe isn't there anymore, are the people going to enjoy the new people what took over?
Yeah.
Conflicts, oh, we've been friends forever. I mean, you have to put all that into consideration when you buy stuff. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think if it's a one-man operation that's been around for a long time, I think the biggest risk you face is you're kind of buying their network.
Right.
Right. And what if they don't like your personality?
Even with me, they go, I know Pete. Yeah, everybody knows Pete, but that's not what it's about. It's good to have, but with the team we have, I wouldn't be successful. So you have to give praise to all of them also. It's not just me.
It's interesting in this shop that he had bought 8 years ago, I guess now, when all of a sudden his logo shows up and his people show up and people are walking through the door, it's very clear that the people who were using this other locksmith did not want to use you.
Right.
Right. Because you were everywhere. This was their only lock shop in town that wasn't you.
Right.
Right. And so when people were showing up, there was a decent amount of people that were not happy.
Right.
That's
going to happen.
Yeah. And so, that's just something to, bring up that, that was a hurdle.
Right.
that you had to overcome.
Right. And, they say, oh, I don't like you guys. Okay. And I ask them why, and they tell me, and I said, well, I think we got that solved now, because with all your employees, everybody has a different attitude. What do you want? Some are more pleasant than others, but it's all about customer service to keep any of your people coming to you.
Yeah.
Customer service has got to be good all the time, even with the difficult ones. But it happens,
Yeah. Well, great. Well, hey, I think we had a really good discussion that highlights a lot of the areas of trying to value a locksmithing business from small to big.
Right.
And I think for some of us, it's kind of hard to hearing this information and then looking at your own business and, being as, intellectually honest as you can with yourself of kind of where that's at and be able to make some choices.
Yeah.
And Michael, do you have any final thoughts or things you'd like to say before we end this?
So the one thing I'll just say, whether you're a buyer or a seller, is get yourself educated as much as you can. Make sure that you have a really good plan financially, because if you're ready to buy a business, consider working capital and make sure you can get as much working capital as you can. Especially in the commercial business, cash flow is an issue. You're going to have accounts receivable. You may buy a business and not get any real money for 30 days, maybe 45 days. And so just think about that. We a lot of times put ourselves in crunches trying to grow, and cash is king at the end of the day. So I'd absolutely recommend that as a guy that's, made every mistake in the book. And I've had the sleepless nights being like, oh crap, I think we overextended ourselves. We got payroll coming tomorrow and look at this. And, you make it through and eventually you can look back and just be stronger because of those instances. But as a seller, also prepare yourself. Spend 2 years, make sure you're focusing on your earnings, get people involved that are familiar with it. Make sure you can get a quality of earnings. Make sure you can read some books about selling, like Built to Sell by John Warlow is amazing. Adam Coffey, he did the private equity playbook, but he wrote another book called the Exit Strategy Playbook. And I think that's, again, it's like a checklist of things that you have to do if you're gonna sell. And all the things that they do may cost money, but it's going to be worth way more to you if you can just implement those things. And so I say preparation no matter what, because you never know when the opportunity is going to come knocking. Suddenly your neighbor that's been a competitor comes to you and there's this opportunity to buy a business that you never even thought about buying. You want to know what your options are.
But you're right. We all have sleepless nights thinking maybe we've overdid ourselves, payroll, and, it happens to everybody when you own a business.
Yeah.
Overextend yourself sometimes, but God willing, it's always worked for me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think for me, the biggest takeaway, just for even being a part of this conversation, is all of us at some point are no longer going to do what we're doing in business, right? Like that's just inevitable. And so being willing to kind of think through what that might look like and how you could exit the best you can for your business is a good thing to spend some time to do. Although I feel like a lot of times it's painful, I mean, and I've shared, in 2022, we got a private equity offer, and I had not up until then really considered at all selling. I mean, it never really crossed my mind. And all of a sudden you're faced with these decisions and these different multiples and all this stuff going on. And
yeah,
it really kind of opened my eyes about, okay, like it's good to spend some time really thinking and understanding and like, what does that look like, down the road or, one day when I don't want to do it anymore. But I think that they can be difficult conversations for us to be intellectually honest with ourselves and with our partners or spouse or, whatever your situation is. And so, yeah, I think it was really good, Michael. I really appreciate you, once again coming on. And man, we've had some really great conversations. And of course, it was really great meeting you here a few weeks ago for down there.
That was awesome. Got to see you and your daughter. That was great. Appreciate you guys coming by.
Absolutely. And Dad, like always, thanks for coming on and being a part of it.
No problem. Thanks, Michael. I like listening to hear what you have to say. That's the reason I haven't said a whole lot.
I like listening to what you have to say too, because again, there's two sides to the coin. There's the guy that's going to be able to service the lock that nobody else can because he's got old inventory and you can basically charge what you want to be able to service that. Right. And, I'm just looking at everything as, it's just an expense. It's an expense and it's an expense. And so, I think there's got to be a balance between a lot of the different sides, but always a great conversation. Love doing this. Thank you guys for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, let's do it again soon. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, buddy. And hey, for all of you who are watching and hanging out with us, and hopefully you're enjoying the conversation, in the comments below, go ahead and put your questions, what you learned, and like always, we'll get a good conversation going in the comments where everyone can add value to it, and all of us can learn. All right, Michael, Dad.
Yep.
Great time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Hey, congratulations, you've made it to the end of the video. You probably deserve a medal, maybe a plaque, but hey, I wanna make sure that when you're commenting that you're including the hashtag Lockboss. When you do, you automatically get entered in to win one of 5 free prizes we're giving away each week here live on YouTube on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. We'll see you in the comments.